I'm a simple man. Samara Weaving, paired with horror comedy. I'm gonna be there every time. It is a glorious day. So Borderline is a brand new movie starring her, Ray Nicholson, who is the son of Jack Nicholson. And what it's about, you have this pop star being protected by her bodyguard from this kind of like creepy, obsessive guy in the late 90s. I want to start off with a trivia question. When you look at this, who do you think the star of this movie is going to be? Who do you think the central plot of this movie is going to be focused around? Well, it was a trick question. It's actually focused on this guy. So yeah, a little bit disappointing. It's supposed to be a horror comedy. I kind of struggle with films like this sometimes because it's very hard to get that blend of horror and old school scares. This movie feels like it wants to be a very pitch black comedy a lot more than the latter, because it feels like this movie in terms of a balance was like 90% comedy, 10% horror. And the comedy didn't necessarily work for me because it felt like something straight out of Nick at Night, Goosebumps, something from like Kenan and Kel, Two Heads Are Better Than None. And congratulations, if you get that reference, you had a great taste in Nickelodeon shows. But in all seriousness, this movie's trying to be a very pitch black comedy about this mentally ill guy who is obsessed with Samara Weaving's character, except this movie has massive tonal issues. And I'll get into it in just a sec why I think it's sort of okay, but this movie does not know what it wants to be. It's kind of trying to be serious, but it is so ham-fisted at other times. It's kind of the trend of 2025 so far. I feel like I constantly find myself repeating the same things in these videos. The comedy in movies so far this year has been laid on so thick. This movie is no different. This movie kind of feels like a Johnny Bravo episode. And whenever I watch a comedy, my litmus test is kind of my facial expression, how I react to jokes, and I constantly found myself wincing and just kind of being like, like that's supposed to be funny. It's not. Kind of the theme of this film, especially the fact that it's exploring mental illness between this guy who's obsessed with her, borderline, I'm assuming borderline schizophrenic. So you have the mental illness angle paired with a very thick but not working sense of humor, and it makes this movie really feel awkward at points as a viewer. The plot's pretty generic, not going to explore that too much. I already explained what it's about in theory. Yeah, the tone of this movie is all over the place, back and forth, very dark but very vibrant at times. The only reason I'll give it a little bit of a pass is I think it could have possibly been a directing choice when it comes to doing this stylistically, trying to make it feel very different from one another, the same way schizophrenia would kind of blur the lines between very serious, very vibrant and funny. And while it doesn't land, maybe that was the point of accrediting this to how this guy would act and how he would perceive things. But it kind of reminded me of a comedy that came out years ago called Movie 43. In that movie, you have this guy, he's pitching terrible movie ideas to these movie executives, and it's supposed to be funny because you're watching his terrible movie ideas. But as a viewer, you are just subjected to watching terrible joke after terrible joke that are not funny, because his pitches are failed, and that's the point of the film. That's kind of how I felt about this film. The jokes are not funny, and if it's going to be stylistic in relation to his like mental health, the schizophrenia, it's just a giant in-joke that we're not a part of because we're being subjected to jokes that aren't funny in the face of style. And I was not really bored with this film, but there came a point I was checking my phone because it felt like nothing of real purpose had happened in this. It was just kind of jumping back and forth, character to character. And when I did look, it was about 30 minutes in exactly, and there was this scene going on with this cop where he shows up to this apartment for a house call. And that was the scene this movie started to lose me, because he shows up and he says, hey, I got a call. There was somebody outside. And she's like, yeah, there was a creepy guy outside. Like, I don't know where he went. The cop just looks at her and he's like, aren't there people outside all the time? This is a busy neighborhood. And it just started to feel really cartoony. But as the scene continued to keep going, I was just like, what is this writing? Because he turns and looks dead serious at the girl who called his daughter and goes, is that the guy? And then they're like, no, that's not a guy. That's my daughter. And then the cop looks back at her and he's like, yeah, I got to be honest with you. I got to take off. I got a musical to attend. Musical? What? So it is what it is. That's the scene. I don't think anything of it. This movie continues to go on and it's just like whatever. Then about 15 minutes later, so this same guy just breaks out full West Side Story in the middle of the sidewalk doing an entire musical bit. And it was at that point I was like, what is this movie trying to accomplish? Like, I'm laughing during the review. I did not laugh during this movie. I'm laughing at how like ridiculous this was. And maybe that was the point of this. I just missed it in real time. And then as the movie goes on, you eventually have Ray Nicholson's character getting into her house and doing things to her and the people around her and people trying to get back and save her. And from a horror perspective, I was also let down a little bit because there was nothing in this movie I haven't seen before. Some of the kills are off screen, nothing super creative. Thankfully, at least, Samara Weaving's great as always. I think she's just probably the best scream queen right now. And surprising enough, I think Ray Nicholson actually has a pretty promising career ahead of him if he picks goofy roles like this. He's just the guy who was smiling off in the distance of Smile 2, but I think he's actually kind of similar to his dad in these creepy main roles. So that's something to hang your hat on when it comes to this movie. Everything else, though, I feel feel like was just very ambiguous and kind of like weird and ambitious. It just kind of didn't make any sense what this movie wanted to be. But I can't fully fault this movie because I was not bored. As I always say, I'd rather dislike a movie than be bored. I think this movie is at least ambitious enough. Maybe some people will have a lot of fun with it. Me, I found this movie to be pretty forgettable. I thought the humor didn't land at all. I thought the scares were pretty forgettable, stuff we've seen 100 times over. But I guess if you are somebody who tends to like these type of silly, goofy, very dark comedy horror movies, maybe keep this one on your radar. It's called Borderline. I would recommend it for when it comes to streaming. So if you guys have heard of this, plan on seeing it, or you did see it, comment down below. Let me know what your thoughts on it are. As always, subscribe to the channel. I love talking movies with you. Like the video. I will see you in the next one. Peace.